Good morning, students. The chapter which we are going to take up today is a very strange and interesting story. The name of the story is My Unknown Friend. Now, from the name itself, we can make out the story must be very strange and interesting because the name says unknown and friend. Now, friend cannot be unknown. Now, a person whom we call friend is always known to us. So, the name of the story itself tells us that there is going to be some strange element in the story because the author calls it unknown friend. So let us hit straight back to the story to find out who is this unknown friend. So as the story begins, the author or the speaker in the story, he is sitting in a railway carriage and a stranger steps in, okay? And the stranger, he recognizes now this person who's already the speaker who's already sitting in the railway carriage, and he tries to be a friend of his. He claims to be a friend of his, but the speaker of the story, the author of the story, is not able to recognize him. So how he handles the situation, whether he tells the truth or what happens in the story, we are going to find out. Okay, so I hope you have your book open with you on page 91. So as I read, you will be reading along. He stepped into the compartment of the Pullman. Now, Pullman is a luxury railway carriage. And the author says that he is the stranger who came into the compartment where I was sitting alone. He had a long fur-lined coat and he carried a $50 suitcase. So the author mentions his description of the stranger here. So he says that he was wearing a long coat. And the author says fur-lined coat. He adds an adjective here, fur-lined coat. And then he says he was carrying a suitcase, and he mentions another adjective here, $50. So, it's very strange that the author is mentioning the price. So it all shows these two adjectives have been written here to express that the person who came into the compartment seemed to be a rich person who was wearing a long coat which was fur lined, and he was carrying a $50 suitcase. Then he saw me. So the stranger looked at the author. Well, he said, and recognition broke out all over his face like morning sunlight. So the moment the stranger saw the author sitting there, he made this remark, well, as if, he had recognized the author who was sitting there. And recognition broke out all over his face. That means for his expressions, it clearly showed that he had recognized the author or he knew the author. And it broke out like morning sunlight. It was very clear. Well, I repeated. Now author, he also repeated the same remarks. He also said well. By Jove, he said. Now by Jove is an expression like we usually say na, oh my God, I can't believe, or by God, we say na, by God, same. So by Jove, he said, shaking hands vigorously. So he started shaking hands with the author vigorously, very hard. Who would have thought of seeing you? So he says that, and I could never imagine that I would be seeing you here. Who, indeed, I thought to myself. Now this author, he is not able to recognize the person who has come in, but he doesn't want to show his ignorance. And he doesn't want to show him that he had not recognized. So he says, who? And he thinks to himself, who? He looked at me more closely. The stranger, he examined the author more closely and he looks at him from top to bottom. You haven't changed a bit, he said. And he makes another remark that you haven't changed, you are still the same. And the author remarks Same way. Neither have you, said I heartily. So, look how cleverly the author is trying to manage the situation. Although he hasn't recognized the stranger, but he is not showing, and you know how safely he is handling, because he's using the same remarks which the stranger is using. So he says, neither have you changed. And all the time I was wondering who he was. So while speaking, while meeting him, in his mind, all the time the author was thinking who this stranger was. He was trying to recollect. Maybe, okay, let us read what happens next. I didn't know him from Adam. So the author says, I didn't know him from the Adam, right? He wants to express that I didn't know him at all. Not even, he had not even recognized him a bit. He had not even a doubt about him. I couldn't recall him a bit. True, I find it very hard to remember people's names. Very often, too, it is hard for me to recall a face, and frequently I fail to recall a person's appearance. And of course, clothes are a thing one doesn't notice. But apart from these details, I never forget anybody. So the author is trying to be humorous here. So he says, I agree that I find it very hard sometimes to, I forget the people's names. I find it hard to recall their faces. I forget their faces also. And you know, I fail many times to recognize a person's appearance also. And of course, I don't notice clothes at all. And apart from these things, I never forget it. Now, what else is left in forgetting? Na to naam yaad hai, neither appearance, neither face, nor clothes. So, what else is left for recognition? So, the author here is trying to tell us that it is very hard for him to remember people or recall their faces, and I am proud of it. The author also very clearly mentions here that he doesn't feel bad about it, that he forgets people very quickly, or he is not able to recall them easily. But when it does happen that a name or a face escapes me, I never lose my presence of mind. So he says that if such a situation happens, that somebody comes and meets me and recognizes me as me, but I am not able to recognize that person, he says, you know, I don't lose that situation. I handle that situation very cleverly, and I use my presence of mind, and I never let that person come to know that I have not recognized that person. So I really handle it very cleverly and intelligently. I know how to deal with such a situation. It only needs coolness and intellect, and it all comes right. He says, I handle very intelligently, and with the passage of time, I am able to recall this person, the person who is in front of me. So my friend sat down. So the person who has come into the carriage, he sat down. It's a long time since we met, he says. So this is another remark by the stranger. He says, we haven't met for a long time. And you look at the author, he's again repeating the remarks which the stranger is making. He says, yes, a long time. I repeated with something of a note of sadness. But you know, the author speaks this no this phrase with a sort of sadness, just to show him that he also suffered, that because they hadn't met for a long time. So I wanted him to feel that I too had suffered from it. But it has gone very quickly. So now the stranger says, but you know, the time has passed very quickly. Although they hadn't met for a long time, but the time had passed very fast. Like a flash, I agreed cheerfully. So again, the author remarks the same way. He says, yes, it has passed like a flash. Strange, he said, how life goes on and we lose track of people and things alter. So now the stranger says that it is very strange that the life goes on very fast, and you know, we often lose track of the people. Lose track means we often, we part from each other and never get to see each other again. So, and things alter, things change. I often think about it. I sometimes wonder, he continued, where old the all the old gang are gone too. So again, the strangest things says that I often think about all these things, and sometimes, I think where the old gang are gone too. So old gang here, he is referring to his old friends. Maybe long time they had a group of friends who used to stay together, who used to hang out together. So he say the strangers thinking about all those old friends where they must be at the present moment. So do I. So the author also says, yes, even I think the same. I said. In fact, I was wondering about it at that very moment. And now the author is thinking to himself. He says that at that very moment, he was thinking all about the old friends only, about the old gang only. I always find in circumstances like these. So the author thinks that in circumstances like these, the present situation in which the author is caught, like he has a stranger in front of him who he is not able to recognize. So he says, in such a situation, gradually the people who meet, they start talking about the old gang or the old friends or the old boys, and it is from the conversation about those old friends and all old boys that the person or maybe the author is able to make out who this person is. So from the talk, the gradually it helps the author to find out who this person is. So he says that I was thinking about maybe he will talk about this old friends and old gang, and then from that I will be able to make out who this person is. That's where the opportunity comes in to understand who he is. Do you ever go back to the old place? He asked. Now, another question by the stranger. So he asked this author that do you go back to the old place? Old place, maybe they must be going to an old place somewhere. They must be visiting that old place regularly where they used to hang out together. So that person, the stranger, asked the author, do you go back to that old place now? Never, I said firmly and flatly. Now, the author very clearly, rules out this. He says, no, I never go back to that place. And this had to be absolute. The author says that I had to very flatly and very bluntly, I had to say no, because right now the author is not able to recognize the person himself. So how could he know about that old place? He had no idea about the old place. So that is why he had to very clearly say that no, I don't never go back, because till he knew about that old place, how could he talk about that old place? So that is why, in place of getting caught here, so he very bluntly says, no, no, I never go back to that old place. So he rules out any possibility of being caught. I felt that once and for all, the old place must be ruled out of the discussion till I could discover where it was. So he says, I had to rule out this point straight away, because I never knew what till I knew where this old place was. How could I talk about it? This? No, he went on, I suppose you hardly care to. So then the stranger says, maybe I just mean to say that maybe now you don't bother to go to that place, or you don't feel like going to that place. Not now. And I said gently. So the author remarks that yes, not now. I don't care going. I don't feel like going to that place now. I understand. I beg your pardon. So the stranger says, I can understand, and I'm really sorry. I beg your pardon that I talked about that place, he says. And that there was a silence for a few moments. So far, I had scored the first point. So the author says that so far, he had been successful in scoring 1 point. Point means that although they had a long discussion till now, but till now this person, the stranger, had not been able to find out that the author had not recognized him. And the author, he had been successful in keeping the stranger uh, away from this truth, no, that he had not recognized. So he says, I had scored the first point. That was evidently an old place somewhere to which I would hardly care to go. So the author says, by saying this, that I never go to that place, or I don't bother going to this place, I think I had scored a positive point here, because otherwise this person would have caught my truth, no. So by saying this, that I hardly care to go that place, now this old place was out of discussion. That was something to build on. So maybe now he would be able to build on the conversation, and he'll be able to find out who this person was. Presently he began again. Yes, he said, I sometimes meet some of the old boys, and they began to talk about you and wonder what you're doing. And then the stranger talks, and he says that sometimes I do meet my friends and our old friends, and sometimes they begin to talk of you, and they are wondering what you are doing. Poor things, I thought, but I didn't say it. And the author, he says, he's thinking to himself that poor things, but he didn't mention it. Why he calls them poor things? Because the author feels that they still remember me, but he doesn't remember, or he doesn't know any one of them, so he calls them poor things. I knew it was time now to make a bold stroke. So now the author feels that I think it was time that I should take a step. I should take a bold stroke. I should do something better, or I should try something better to find out who this person is, or I should try something which should be able, so that he should be able to recognize or recall who this person is. So I use the method that I always employ. So the author says, I use the method which he always employs, which he always uses. I struck in with great animation. And he says, I started talking with great animation, with great confidence. And let us see what he says, what he talks about. Say, I said, where's Billy? Do you ever hear anything of Billy now? Now, the author has made a guess now. No, he's hit an arrow in darkness. Let us see whether this arrow hits the point or not. जैसे in Hindi, we say na, अंधेरे में तीर चलाना, same thing. So he says that where's Billy? Although the author does not know who this Billy is, but he has just tried a trick here. This is really a safe line. Every old gang has a Billy in it. Now, why the author has used the name Billy? Because he feels that this name Billy is very, very common, and almost every old gang, has a Billy in it. It is, you people might have also experienced that some names, they are very familiar. Even my name Gagandeep, I feel it's very, very common name. Every third or fourth person is called Gagan. There are boys also, there are girls also. So same way, the author feels that Billy is a very common name, so he uses this trick to find out more about the stranger. So he says, how's Billy? Where is he now? Yes, said my friend. Sure, Billy's ranching out in Montana. And the author's trick, it hits the point, because the stranger says, yes, Billy, he is ranching out in Montana. So he's telling that he's ranching out in Montana. Ranching is taking care of a ranch, in a farm, like where cows and horses and sheep, they are bred. So he says he's there in Montana, and he has a ranch there. I saw him in Chicago last spring. Weighed about 200 pounds. You wouldn't know him. So he describes him that, I saw him last time in Chicago and he was weighing, he's grown very fat, he's about 200 pounds, and you wouldn't know him. Uh, no, I certainly wouldn't, I murmured to myself. So the author thinks to himself that, yeah, no, I would not be able to recognize him. The author is saying this because he doesn't know who actually believes. He's just made a trick to find out more about the author. So he just murmurs to himself, he speaks to himself. And where's Pete? I said, this is also a safe ground. There is always a Pete. So he tries another name. He says, where's Pete? And he feels there is always a Pete in every group. You mean Billy's brother? He said. And again, the author has hit a point because Pete is also there. So the stranger says, yeah, you mean Billy's brother? Yes, yes, Billy's brother Pete. I often think of him. Oh, answered the unknown man, old Pete's quite changed, settled down altogether. Here he began to chuckle. Why, Pete's married. And he says, yes, yes, you're talking about Billy's brother, Pete. He's quite changed now. He's very settled down, and he makes a laughter. He chuckles, he makes a sort of joke. He says, Pete is married now. Like as if he was trying to say that nobody could imagine that once upon a time Pete will get married, but he is finally married. So, children, we finished today's lesson here, and we'll continue next time. I hope you like this part of the story. I want you to read the story so that we can continue later. Thank you, and have a nice day.